Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Sit Down. Glad that you are joining me here. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke, one of the pastors on staff here at White Rock United Methodist Church. We are doing the Sunday Sit Down here during Lent, and we've kind of been a little bit bouncing back and forth in different directions. And I kind of thought, where do we go from here with Lent? What is the conversation we want to have? And I was drawn back to a colleague, a friend of mine that I've done a little bit of work with, all digitally. We've never actually met in person, which is part of the fun of this. And so I wanted to invite her in to come talk about what is the idea of doing rituals. And right, we're doing a lot of Lent rituals, a lot of it digitally right now. So I thought of my friend Shamika, and she, when it comes to digital rituals, you kind of wrote the book on how to do this because you took the Eucharist and said, I'm going to take communion and figure out how to make this digital.
Yes.
Which is a pretty big deal. I mean, that's a big thing to tackle. So we did a conversation sometime in the last year during the pandemic, really talking about communion, really when the Methodist Church was wrestling with whether or not we could do communion in a digital space. And you were gracious to come in and have that conversation. And so you and Kenji started. Give us a little bit of background on what really got you into this idea of technology and how to do like specifically rituals, like real high rituals like communion in digital spaces like this.
Absolutely. So I am a student of Union Theological Seminary where I got my Master of Divinity. And that's where I started thinking about technology and spirituality, faith communities, spiritual practices, these kinds of things. That was when that sort of bug first got into me and I started pursuing those kinds of questions. And Kenji and I met through the eFormation conference. We were put together for a presentation. And in preparing for that presentation, we were looking at different spiritual apps on the app stores, and we realized that there wasn't one for the Eucharist. And we thought, well, that's kind of strange. Someone should look into doing that. And eventually that someone became us. And we thought about, well, what are the theological groundings for Eucharist and how can we infuse those into a digital space? So we ended up taking the code that I used to program the app, and we had that blessed by clergy. We used the Catholic tradition of spiritual communion. And so that was what undergirded the prayer that's in our Eucharist app, E-Eucharist. And that was what drove the project. And then we just sort of set out into the world. So that was how that project got off the ground.
Which is just so brilliant and so clever. So you mentioned eFormation through Virginia Theological, right?
Yes.
Virginia Theological Seminary. I do some work with them too. I love what they're doing there. I feel like they're really pushing the bounds, and so I'm really grateful for the work they're doing. And that it's ended up. I mean, that's where we ended up meeting. I think was through an eFormation gathering at some point. But okay, so you did e-Eucharist with Kenji. I know Kenji's doing a lot of chaplaincy stuff up in, I think it's Chicago, right? Isn't that where he still is? And so now you've started Tech Chaplain, right? And so what led you to this idea of, you know what we need? We need some tech chaplains out there, because pre-pandemic, you would have never thought this would be a thing. But now I bet this is a huge thing.
Absolutely. So again, in seminary, I was actually just helping people set up their email, set up their computers at the beginning of the first semester of seminary. And I was just helping people with their technology, and it became a part of my reputation. So more and more people started asking for help with their tech. So eventually I went to the IT department and asked them if they could do drop-in hours or something, because there's a lot of students who needed help, and they did the best thing they could have done, which was say, no, but we can support you in doing that. So I got hired by the IT department to do these drop-in hours. And so over the winter break, I thought very deeply about the stories that students were telling me in regard to how differently they felt the help they were receiving was, and how it helped them overcome their fear and anxiety around technology. And they didn't feel like when they were asking for help, they did something wrong or felt silly or stupid or anything like that. And so I really took that to heart and started to craft Tech Chaplaincy. And it was in a conversation with an adjunct professor who's also a pastor, who recognized that the work that I was doing with students was really practicing this ministry of presence and helping usher folks through these moments of difficulty with technology with grace and dignity. And that's something that a chaplain does. So that's where the concept of tech chaplaincy really got its name. And then I was able to thankfully launch the Tech Chaplaincy Institute this past summer on Juneteenth, which is my grandmother's birthday. And I was so grateful to have the opportunity to do that after years of thinking and visioning and serving people as a tech chaplain, to have this organization through which I could help more people.
That's it's so brilliant that you had the the thought of even doing that and then actually brought it to fruition. As somebody who often has a lot of ideas and doesn't always follow through with them, I'm so like inspired by your willingness to actually make it happen. So I love that. Okay, so currently you're at UC Boulder working on your PhD, right?
Yes. I'm in the information science department studying technology, ethics, and social justice issues.
Good Lord. Technology, ethics, and social justice.
Yes.
Oh, what an interesting combination of things like clashing together in various worlds. Well, I love that because I think that, ethics is a huge thing that I'm really interested in pursuing also in the digital space. So I love that you're in the throw of it and in academics, making sure that's happening. I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about this idea of rituals in a digital space. And we may have talked about this last time we had a conversation too, but one thing that I've seen so much of throughout the pandemic is that we're having a really hard time, especially things like dealing with grief and mourning, and we don't have the common rituals that we used to, even with being able to say goodbye to loved ones. And so I would love to explore the idea of rituals in a digital space. And I'm just curious if you've had, obviously the Eucharist is a huge one, but have you started exploring what that looks like? What other rituals make sense, and what are the rituals that don't make sense maybe in a digital space, and how you're kind of going about that?
Sure. So it was actually a while before the pandemic that the rituals that are sacraments to our communities have actually occurred in the digital space. So people have been baptized online, married, funeralized, all of these things before the pandemic. But it took the pandemic to really bring a lot more people into the conversation than were before, in a way that caused folks who either hadn't considered technology, had an aversion to technology and their faith practices, to suddenly have to theologically wrestle with that. So I think that I believe that there isn't a sacrament or spiritual practice or ritual that can't be done in the digital space, because I believe that God is omniscient and omnipresent everywhere, including the digital space.
Including, yeah, we kind of lost you for a second. You said including the digital space. Oh, I think we lost you for a second there.
Am I back
okay,
now?
you were saying you think God is omnipresent, right, everywhere, including the digital space.
Yes, exactly. So Reverend Jim Key says that the opposite of physical isn't, or the opposite of digital isn't, I'm messing up his phrasing. The opposite of digital isn't physical. No, I'm gonna.
No, I know. I know the exact saying you're thinking about. I get confused too. The opposite of real. Is that right?
It's real, physical, and digital. Those are all parts of that phrasing. But the opposite of physical and digital are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
So thinking about the digital space and the sacred space, I think those are one and the same.
Right.
So where two or more are gathered, God is in the midst of them, regardless of how they're gathered. So that's what's important to me.
So I have a couple questions about that. One is around Lent, and one is around this idea of what do we do with the idea of incarnation in the midst of this, right? So we talk about, God being incarnate in the flesh. And so, is there some sort of divide, or are we missing something whenever we stick to physical space, or when we stick to digital spaces and not have the physical connection? Have you addressed that?
Well, I think that it is an important distinction to make, but I wouldn't say that um, just because it's a digital space that there has to be something missing. The physical space has its own realm. It has its own sort of experience and reality to it, and the digital space is just different. So
Yeah.
I think when you're comparing the two, thinking about um, what's what's gained, what's lost, what the pros, what the cons are. There's still a lot of richness available to both.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like if you're comparing driving in a car versus driving in a truck, they both get you there. Just slightly differently, and you could do
Yeah.
different things with each.
I love that. That's a good way to put it. Is you're just the expectations almost have to be different, right? That there's still an experience there. It's just a very different experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Kind of an evolution of experience, maybe. So, okay, we're here. We are in Lent. What aspects of Lent have you seen that have translated really well into the digital space? Like, I think, Holy Week's coming up. Monday, Thursday's going to be here. I'm not seeing a whole lot of foot washing that's going to take place in digital space. Like, unless we start like playing with VR or something, right? But like, what aspects or what ritual, right? We could go there. We're not
We
quite ready yet,
could.
but I think we could go there.
Someone can do it.
What things are you seeing for Lent that have been really intriguing to you in terms of rituals in this space?
Well, I was just doing some digging before our conversation, and I came across this Lent calendar online, and it's sort of like an advent calendar but for Lent, and it has these different boxes for each day where you can only access the box on that day or before. I think that there's a lot of ways that people are being innovative in finding ways to bring our rituals to the digital space that can be done. And I think there's a lot of room for innovation, which is what is exciting about this moment. As awful as it has been to be in the situation we are in with the pandemic, there's still this silver lining in the ability to take technology and really innovate our liturgies and innovate our spiritual practices and innovate the way that we build relationship with each other and with God.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and it does. It sometimes takes almost a retraining of our mind back to this idea of like kind of an evolution of experience, that we can still have these productive, rituals, experiences. We just have to remember that they're not going to be exactly the same as what they were before. That doesn't mean they have less value. They're just different. And that can be really hard whenever their values and rituals, things that we loved so much the way they used to be. But if we're not evolving, we're dying, right? I think that's biological. Isn't that true? Okay, so you're studying ethics. One thing I have a whole lot of questions about that we don't have time to talk fully in depth here is, where do you find the intersection of all this digital stuff and ethics, and what is being left behind or what's not being talked about in the ethical space of maybe even who's not able to participate in some of the rituals because of ethical issues, or I'm fumbling the question, but I'll pause there and see if you have reflections on that.
Yeah. I think it's the question of the digital divide. So there's people who, like I talked about, the innovations and the affordances that technology provides. But if you're someone who doesn't have access to high-speed internet, if you don't have access to the devices, if you don't have access to the skills to use those things, then you're one of the people being left out of the conversation, left out of the innovation. Your ideas and your perspectives aren't on the table. So I think that's one area of the conversation that needs more attention, because more people are starting to talk about the digital divide and what needs to be done about it in light of the pandemic, because you see these issues where before there were students who had to go to the McDonald's parking lot to do their homework, right? Because they don't have internet at home. But now you have large swaths of the population who are either rural or they can't afford internet access. They only have a mobile device at home, or you might have a student who gets a device from their school, but it's sort of walled off, so the rest of the family can't use it for job applications or this sort of thing. Or so as more of our society moves to the digital space, we need to think about either how to bring others along, or what can we do for those who aren't able to access it.
So I think I actually heard somebody one time refer to it as digital redlining, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Like that's such a good comparison. What do you think the role of the church is, or just faith communities in general, in the idea of addressing these ethical issues and helping society move forward on this?
Mm. Well, I think that the church can do a really great job of being an advocate for these communities because there are faith communities who have food pantries, who work with unhoused populations, who they have their finger on the pulse of the people in their community and what their needs are, and this is one more need. So I've heard conversations where faith communities think about being a Wi-Fi hub for their community so people can have access to free Wi-Fi through the church. But there's also conversations that are happening on the local, state, and federal level that the church can be a part of to help bring these conversations across the finish line and get more ideas, more resources, more eyeballs on the problem, and hopefully get to some solutions.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people haven't come to the idea that high speed internet is a human right. But in all actuality, it's kind of becoming that point, right? If you don't have access to high speed internet, then you're being left behind big time. And so I think that's
Absolutely.
a big question that we as the church and anybody who's really seeking for justice is going to have to start addressing pretty quickly. I think I actually read somewhere the UN has made it a goal and
A
have called it
human
a
right.
human right. Yeah, which is
Yep.
pretty awesome. Are you seeing other ethical issues in digital spaces that are just now emerging or that are starting? Like I'm thinking like AI issues and things like that you think are going to be up and coming and we're all going to be reading about pretty soon.
Well, a lot of the conversation around AI or machine learning or algorithms has been about like facial recognition software that doesn't recognize certain faces, like darker skinned faces or Black women in particular, well. But then on the other hand, it's being used for, in some cases, nefarious purposes. Criminal justice, for example, you have police and other law enforcement using facial recognition software. There was a story about a gentleman who was falsely arrested because the AI looked at a bunch of driver's license and picked his up, and they thought that he did a crime that he didn't commit. So I think that's where the conversation is now. As far as where the conversation is going, it's hard to say.
Sure.
But I feel like as more people become familiar with terms like algorithm, you have algorithmic the Algorithms of Oppression by Dr. Savia Noble and books like Race After Technology with Ruha Benjamin. So as more scholars are getting their work out to the public, the conversation is going to be infused with the technical information so that people understand the technology. But even the people who are creating the technology don't understand how it's making the decisions that it makes. It's black box when it comes to machine learning, for example, and certain neural networks. So being able to explain AI, explainable AI, that's a big burgeoning topic and field
Yeah.
for AI machine learning. But I would say that as more and more people become a part of the conversation, there are going to be more holes that get exposed because new perspectives are going to be able to ask questions like, wait a minute, why didn't you all think about X or Y or this group of people or whatever
Yeah.
the case may be or this scenario? So I think as more people become privy to the conversation, we'll be able to get more insights.
Oh, this is so fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you forever and just keep asking more and more questions. But I know we're running out of time. We're about 1 minute left. So just so people can find you on the interwebs, what are places they can go to find you?
So techchaplain.com is the best place to find me. That's where we have news and information about the Tech Chaplaincy Institute, as well as our social media. And my email address is shamika@techchaplain.com. So people are free to email me if they have questions or if they think they need a tech chaplain and I can be helpful. And the quote, by the way, Reverend Jim Keith, he said that the opposite of digital isn't real, it's physical. And both digital and physical are real.
There we go. You're right. I couldn't quite wrap my mind around it too, but I've heard him say it multiple times, and it's so good every time. But hey, thanks so much for all you do. I'm really encouraged by all that you're pushing and exploring, and I'm going to continue to lean on you because you're just doing incredible work. So I'm really grateful for all that you do, and thanks for bringing pastoral aspects into digital spaces. It's just it's really encouraging.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you soon, Shamika. All right, everybody. We're gonna take a break for worship. We'll be back in just a few minutes. So go warm up your coffee. We'll be back and we'll continue in Lent and worship this week.